Hello, everyone. I'm June Rawl. I'm happy you're able to join us today as we unpack reading standards that support highly engaged reading instruction. Our reading domain focus today is on reading foundations that include phonological awareness, phonics, and word recognition. Today we have Nicole Howard Rice from Palm Beach County Public Schools facilitating our webinar. Nicole currently serves as the ABE GED program lead with specific emphasis placed on curriculum and instructional support for both instructors and administrators. We're so happy to have Nicole with us today. In today's webinar, Nicole will explore how unpacking the TABE 11 and 12 reading standards doesn't have to be an instructional task deemed overwhelming, but instead it can be viewed as an opportunity for the necessary skills to meet highly engaged collaborative play for the adult learner. But before we get started, I want to just review some housekeeping rules. Remember to ask your questions. To do that, you just use the Q&A tab that you see on your screen. Please do ask questions. We'll monitor those and all of your interactions throughout the webinar and address them as they come up. Keep in mind that your attendee microphones are muted. And remember, today's webinar, like all IDPAE webinars, are recorded and will be available within 48 hours. Also, the PowerPoint for today and the handbook for this webinar has already been posted on the IDPAE website. You'll see the link in the chat section of your screen too. We'll put the link out there for you to access it. So that's it. Nicole, I'm going to turn it over to you, and enjoy the webinar, everyone, and we'll be here to assist.
Thank you so much, June. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today on today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to thank everyone for doing what you do for learners and teachers every single day. It's together that we get there. In this session, we will explore effective phonics, word analysis, and decoding strategies that will increase learning gains and skill mastery. We will also introduce figurative language vocabulary elements through an activity-based approach. All of these resources are aligned with the TABE 11 and 12 and Florida curriculum frameworks. The guiding questions that are found in the handbook will really support you within this session. I'll read two of them for you just so that you know just how much these will benefit you for future webinars. You're going to be asked to think about what your main takeaway from this session is. You'll also be asked to define the term phonics. Questions like that to help you to hone in on where you're going in your thinking. But before we even go there, we must remember the importance of even us having a growth mindset, so that that'll be carried over into our classrooms and prepares our learners to walk with a growth mindset. William Arthur Ward says it best. The mediocre teacher tells. The good teacher explains. The superior teacher demonstrates. But that great teacher inspires. I know that you all are great, so let's get started. More often than not, it is found when speaking to other teachers, when you ask, have you had an opportunity to look at the TABE 11 and 12 blueprint? Teachers are saying, no, I don't have time to do that. I haven't done that yet. If that's you, then today is for you. You're gonna find that it's very important that we take the opportunity to look at the blueprints, and the blueprints are found on the TABE website. They're also good for you to use when you receive that TABE profile report, which was addressed in a webinar, last week's webinar for reading specifically. So and the breakdown was also given for that. For today's webinar, we're gonna put our focus where you see the arrows on phonics and word recognition. And we're gonna spend our time on the high emphasis area for level E. And that area is going to be Know and apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. Now for college and career readiness, the grade equivalent for this would be grades 2 and 3. The content emphasis is high. The NRS levels for this would be levels 1 and 2. Later in the presentation, we'll take a look at the NRS levels for levels 1 and 2 so that you can begin to paint a picture. The RF for this level is reading foundations. The reason why this is so important and oftentimes overlooked by instructors, because there's so many things that we have to cover, is when adult learners come to a classroom, a lot of the times they have foundational skill gaps that go as low as how to pronounce words. And in dealing with an adult who's having those levels of concerns, we have to approach it from a creative standpoint. So as a teacher, you're often finding yourself like the young lady in the slide. How will I teach phonemic awareness, phonics, and introduce figurative language vocabulary so that my learners retain and master the word concepts so that they actually make learning gains? If you're going to do that, then you have to have a point to ponder checklist with yourself as an instructor. How are your adult learners currently mastering new vocabulary words? That's a question you've got to ask yourself. As an instructor, am I supporting the adult learner in learning new vocabulary words to improve these skills? After instructing on new vocabulary skills, are you able to make a concerted effort to really hone in on what the learner needs and have them apply those vocabulary skills to make sure that they're able to regurgitate that when taking the TABE test or once they've graduated to the GED test? Again, with the growth mindset, you've had your points to ponder. You've begun thinking about creative ways to approach the learning. Now you must ask yourself, do you love challenges? Can you get your students to begin to love challenges, be intrigued by the mistakes that they make, and enjoy effort in the fact that they keep trying to learn, that they keep on learning, and as they are learning, you're learning as well. Let's get into it. What is phonics? Phonics is a method of teaching people to read by correlating sounds with letters or groups of letters in an alphabetic written system. What is decoding in reading? The ability to apply your knowledge of letter-sound relationships, including knowledge of letter patterns, to correctly pronounce written words. Understanding these relationships gives learners the ability to recognize familiar words quickly and to figure out words that haven't been seen before. Here's a good example, and I want to use an adult example. The example on this provided on the slide is, you keep falling asleep, and in code, I am tired. We have to consider what our learners bring to the classroom, especially when we're dealing with foundational level skills. You think to yourself, okay, we have phonics, we have phonemic awareness, and we have decoding. When you think about phonemic awareness versus phonics, phonics deals with segmentation and blending sounds, breaking words apart, and then putting them back together through sound recognition. Phonemic awareness hears the sounds of the words. So one breaks down and one hears. Phonics connects the sounds. Like, for example, the long E sound makes a specific sound. Phonemic awareness is the ability to rearrange sounds and create new sounds. When dealing with phonics and phonemic awareness, I'm going to go back. When dealing with phonics and phonemic awareness within your classroom with the adult learner, We have to consider that the adult learner more often than not is very shy about this and embarrassed. So it has to be approached from a growth mindset perspective. You have to find a creative way to highlight your perfection as an instructor, but also your weakness, so that as an adult learner, the learner is able to connect with you as the instructor, so that you're able to have a window to expose this learner to the necessary skills they're going to need to be successful learning concepts such as these. It's also been brought to our attention as instructors that early language learners are now transitioning into ABE classrooms. If you've had that experience, go ahead and you can add it in the chat box if you'd like. If not, you just want to listen, that's fine. But there is a movement of early language learners transitioning from maybe ESOL levels 3, 4, and 5, and 6 and 7, transitioning into ABE classrooms. If in fact you had an early language learner that's in your classroom, that learner may have so many other hangups and challenges within your class. You have to consider that 77% of the learner's native language may not have some of the phonemes that will be found for the English language learner. So if this is difficult for an English language learner, and you know it's difficult for a person who speaks English as a first language, we have to come up with creative ways to teach these concepts and drive them home. Word analysis is the same. It's a process of learning more about word meanings. So once you've got that learner to really grasp the concept of breaking down the words in part, understanding the sounds of the words, putting them back together, now it's time for you to introduce that learner into meanings, learning more about word meanings by studying the origins and the parts, like a morpheme. That's the smallest meaningful part of a word. It's also known as morphemic analysis or word analysis. I want to go back here. I'm going to move on to figurative language, which is also very important. But I want to talk to you about parts of speech when teaching vocabulary. You've broken the words out through segmentation. You've worked with sound through phonemic awareness and versus phonics. You've decoded the words. You've taken this learner from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. There has to be some activity within this because these are adults. I will provide you with 2 very successful activities at the end of this presentation. But if you're going to teach such foundational skills, I cannot emphasize it enough. You must provide some level of collaborative play for the learner. And even for you, most of our adult programs are in the evening. So we have to be highly engaging when dealing with our learners and also with ourselves in our lesson planning if we get an opportunity to do so. And if you don't, then IDPAE is just for you because we have all the resources that'll get you where you need to be. Once we've talked about parts of speech, the breakdown of the parts of speech elements that I'm going to address, they're going to be found in the handbook. There's a specific section just for parts of speech vocabulary for reading. We speak to nouns, adjectives, verbs, conjunctions, prepositions, articles, interjections, and adverbs. I don't believe, and this is in my experience as an educator, I do not believe that it is effective to teach a learner new words and not also explain the part that this word plays within speech. That will assist the learner when the learner is required to use it in a sentence and if the learner is required to use it, then in a paragraph, and then if the learner is required to use it in dialoguing with you, and which is also a great tool to ensure mastery for a new word. And that's required that the learners use the new vocabulary in real time in the class with you through just general conversation. After you've covered those sections, and that can take some time. Then we get into vocabulary with figurative language. As you're building that, you say, Nicole, why are we talking about figurative language? Because it's an introduction to how the learner takes the words that you've exposed them to, how they take them and begin to build foundational sentences for subject-verb agreement. And then you begin to have mentor sentences that you build upon later. But for foundational sentences, you need to provide that level of foundation as it relates to parts of speech, phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding, word analysis, and then figurative language. For the sake of this presentation, we won't deal with all of these other components: idioms, metaphors, similes, personification, oxymorons, allusions, imagery, hyperbole, symbolisms. We're only going to spend our time on alliteration in the green. And you'll see why it's important for this level of learning. What is figurative language, we ask? It informs through the use of figure of speech, of which we're used to persuade and impact a literary experience of the reader, for the learner. So what's key here, Nicole? Any passages that you read, no matter the level, they need to be relative to your audience. Take the extra minute to find an article, no matter where it is. Nuzella's, there are plenty of websites that you could use, but like Nuzella's a great one. Take the time to pull something that can be a current event, something relative to where we are in the season with the weather. It could be something that could be aligned with a learner being successful on the TABE or the GED test, because that's ultimately where we're trying to build the learner skills up to. It could definitely be something related to vocation, because that's where we are with career and technical education, and that's a push right now. So always try to pull a text that's going to speak to figurative language, no matter the level. That's going to give you good vocabulary that will encourage you and your students to engage in close reading. And that's something that has been addressed in webinars past, close reading and annotation, which helps the learner to really build on what they're doing as it relates to parts of speech and now figurative language. What figurative language is not? We've decoded the words. We've conducted a word analysis. We've addressed parts of speech. We've introduced thoughts behind figurative language. It is found that even as instructors, sometimes we have difficulty with teaching figurative language. And if we're going to really delve into what works, let's talk about what figurative language is not. It's not literal language, which tells the reader that all words are strict in accordance with the original meaning. So there's nothing extra. An example would be, I have 3 sandwiches for lunch. That's just plain. My name is Sally Smith. If I were going to be saying something that had anything to do with figurative language, I'd be saying, I may use something like, my name is Sally Smith, bam. I've just taken it to a whole nother place. But for literal language, it's straight and to the point. That may work at the very, when you're introducing, but let's try to find small ways to infuse different levels so that we can, even as we're teaching the learner, we are preparing the learner with a growth mindset to keep the learner moving forward. Are there, within the handbook, there's a complete breakdown on decoding. There's also effective strategies for unknown vocabulary words. There's an instructional vitamin to tell you exactly when you can use these within a push in or pull out section of a day, if you get an opportunity to do that. And that's highly encouraged to do, especially when you're dealing with foundational level learning. More on figurative versus literal language. Figurative language, the illustration of meaning other than foundational learning. The foundational and or literal meaning of a sentence, paragraph, or text. Figurative language uses figures of speech. They're encouraged. They're a necessity. Literal language does not use figures of speech at all. We talked about that straight away. Figurative language often found in poetry and a narrative text. Make sure, again, that we pull texts that are relevant to the learners that you are serving. Literal language is often found in science and research text. So if in fact you're doing some kind of science infusion or some kind of mathematical / science infusion, because you should be able to, these skills, they should be interrelated within all of the subject areas. The skills that the learner that you're going to take back to your districts and to your school sites from this webinar are going to be able to be transferred in a math class, in a science class, a social studies class, as well as a reading and language arts class. So let's keep that in mind. I've got an activity for you. A vocabulary Scrabble. If you've had an opportunity to look at your handbook, there's a page in there that's broken out by morphemes, free and bound. Examples of free morphemes are book, and, little, lagoon. Bound morphemes deal with play, occasion, cheap, bright, and they're bound because brightness, cranberries. The early language learner in this area, before we even get to vocabulary Scrabble, they're going to need for you to really have some level of visual learning present, because you need to consider the fact that this learner, again, 77% of this learner's native tongue does not have the phonemes that we have within our language. Number one. Number two, you want to respect what the learners bring to the classroom. Same thing with the English speaking learner. With English as a first language, you're going to want to consider the prior knowledge that this learner brings to the classroom. Use that through a visual piece before you even introduce the new vocabulary words. Find a visual, some type of visual, whether it be a cartoon, whether it be a regular picture, whatever you can find that will appeal to the learner, activate prior knowledge to ease in the transition of teaching the new vocabulary, is going to be of great benefit to all learners. One more thing about figurative language. Figurative language describes something as a comparison to something else. So it's going to be very important that even with the alliteration that we're going to speak to today, that you find something to compare it to, that the learner already knows with full mastery. That's going to help to connect the dots. There are more than 21 types of literary devices and techniques. There are different variations to those different techniques, though. The understatement or emphasis placed on words, So again, before you introduce new words, find words that are synonyms to the word that you're going to introduce that learners have been exposed to. It'll help to make the connections, and it'll help make, when you do the segmentation piece for the phonics and phonemic awareness and the decoding, and then doing the word analysis, it will help the learner to connect the dots, and the learner will feel less embarrassed and less ashamed, and really embrace that growth mindset and walk in those challenges. And it will also assist you as the instructor in getting that learner to where you know that learner needs to be to make those gains, by the learning gains that they need by the end of the term or year. Figurative language makes relationships. Again, that relationship piece, connecting those dots is going to be very important. Figures of sound, back to sound, what we hear. Let's make correlations with prior knowledge. I can't emphasize prior knowledge enough. Verbal sounds, all things that learners need, especially as adults, to feel comfortable with learning new things, especially when they are at the foundational level. And they're not really sure that they have what it takes to walk this process out. We just have to remind them through prior experience, through everything that they've learned, that this is just one more thing that they're going to learn, and get them there. Let's look at phonemic awareness, letter to word play. Let's see what comes up here. Given our season, there's an activity that's been included, and this activity is also included within the handbook, and it's called Thanks in My Basket. This activity is so exciting because it may seem, you may at first glance say, this looks like a kid game, but you'd be so surprised. Adults have done this game. You'll be so surprised at how much adults appreciate collaborative play, building community. A lot of the times, learners who are at a foundational level, they need someone to connect to. So group play provides them another level of comfort, which affords them an opportunity to embrace that which you are working to expose them to, which is ultimately going to support that growth mindset, learner skill mastery, solid vocabulary retention, and enforces application. If the learner can't feel like they can take it home that day and use it with a family member, or use it in their work, or just in their conversation, then here's where we begin to have the problem with our foundational level learners with retention, program retention. They have to be able to connect dots. And Thanks in My Basket does a really good job of that. This is a proud adult learner who actually played this game, created this basket out of construction paper, glitter, glue sticks, and shredded confetti paper within the inside, given our harvest season. The materials needed for this activity are as follows. The items can be purchased at a dollar store, but most of these items we have in our cabinets at work. We have markers, glue sticks, colored pencils, scissors, glitter, construction paper, and tape. Within the handbook, there is a complete layout of how this activity, what the objectives are, that the students will learn how to make a paper basket. Students will improve phonemic awareness, spelling, and decoding skills. The materials needed are listed as well, with the picture to match. And the instructions to complete the activity are also listed. I think it bears mentioning that this student, this adult learner, this proud adult learner that we have here is much like most of our adult learners. This young lady really worked to to go back to school at least 10 times. And the learner wasn't successful the first 9 times. But this learner was able to really embrace a collaborative learning environment, and the learner was successful. The learner had foundational skill gaps that needed to be closed, that were embraced, that helped this learner. As you can see within this presentation in real time, this learner has received her state-approved high school diploma through a GED program. Now that's exciting. That is what we'd like to see. A learner who had foundational learning to overcome, but through an activity-based approach, without forfeiting the standards, but properly unpacking the standards, then taking the time to creatively consider what must happen and to ensure that this learner actually grasps concepts. You have to think to yourself, okay, because I know some of you are saying, okay, wait a minute, Nicole, I have a class with a whole bunch of levels. So what am I going to do with that? I hear your activity. It sounds great. I hear the process. Thank you for unpacking the standard. Thank you for talking to me and providing me with information on phonics, phonemic awareness, all things I could use. But what does this look like in a classroom full of different levels of students? This is what it looks like. There's no way as adult educators that we're going to be able to hone in on each level without a strategic plan. And as adults, you know and I know, we learn from each other. The adult learner is the same. It takes an extra step because you have to really know and understand that TABE profile report. You have to have a sound knowledge of the NRS levels. You have to be able to really break them down, and IDPAE provides matrices to support you in that process. You also have to consider this particular learner style of learning. So you have to consider what trends you have in your class. How many kinesthetic learners do you have in your class, meaning that learner learns while doing? How many tactile learners do you have in your class, meaning that learner has to touch something even while you're giving direct instruction, when you're working to appeal to the auditory learner who has to hear what you are saying? You have quite a few things that you must consider. But in a class that has different levels, all of these pieces have to be threaded together. And once those pieces are threaded together, you would be encouraged in grouping your students. Don't be afraid to group your students from level, for the sake of this webinar, level E, level M, level D, level A, in the same group, because they will reach back and pull each other up. They will be more comfortable saying what they don't know to each other because they're all in the same boat than they would be talking to you, if you can really understand where I'm coming from with that. So you're highly encouraged to begin to engage more in collaborative play, especially when teaching foundational level skills. So much so that they'll take this home and it'll be learning for the whole family. You remember in that basket, let's go back. You see these letters in this basket, these little letters, where you pull them out, Scrabble, and form new words, new vocabulary words. You see this proud adult learner. And this is a family member of the proud adult learner, really engaging in the opportunity and having a great time learning with mom. This encourages family literacy. If we're going to truly impact adult learners, we're going to have to make the connection and realize that we're not just teaching one, but we're teaching a unit. And that doesn't have to be overwhelming. That can be quite inspiring. That could be quite creative through activities, through reminds, through asking, through reflective thought from the learner's perspective. How did you like this activity? Did it work? Let me see you use 5 of our new words. Write them in a paragraph. Write them in a simple sentence. Once you've got them real good at that foundational level, you might ask them to write a complex sentence and make it fun. Please, please make it fun. Align the lesson to support the learners where they are. Even when you begin to put them on ladders to go higher and higher with their foundational level learning, that's going to move to a more complex level of learning. So remember again what we've covered thus far: phonics, phonemic awareness, decoding, word analysis. We've covered we spoke to parts of speech briefly, and I let you know that it's available in the handbook. We spoke to guiding questions. We also spoke to figurative language, specifically on alliteration. We've worked with Thinks in My Basket, that begins to apply that which was learned through all those other things that we just spoke about, through letters and vocabulary scramble. And if you get really good, you can take those same letters, create words, then create sentences. And the learner can take it home and teach the family. And then now you've got complete buy-in for that learner, because now that learner, no matter whom that learner is, that learner feels that they have been able to add something to their family. So it's more than just a classroom. You become more than just the instructor for adult learners. You become a person of hope for this learner. And they buy in and they begin to trust whatever you provide for them. So it's worth taking the extra time to think about being creative in teaching foundational level skills, especially when it comes to vocabulary. Our learners don't fare as well when it's time to fill out an application. Not because they don't have prior knowledge, but because they don't have the foundational skills necessary to understand the vocabulary within the application. Or on a job, when somebody's having a conversation and somebody's speaking to them and they're using words that are over their head, so to speak, because they haven't had anyone to take the time to take learning new vocabulary to the next level, to a level of collaborative adult learning play. Again, another example, and you can see that now at home, this is a whole family idea. And the learner has actually, the young learner has actually formed new words. So you're helping him with sight words. The adult learner is learning in the classroom and coming home, teaching the students. So now the adult learner is able to come home and better support the K-12 learner in the classroom. This is what adult education is all about. Now that we've covered the letters and the words and forming simple sentences through vocabulary Scrabble, let's talk about our figurative language word focus here. Alliteration. There's a small picture over on the right by Samuel Taylor. For the sky and the sea and the sea and the sky. I hope somebody is making that connection now. The connection that you can even use figurative language at the foundational level. I didn't say pick all of them, but you could choose one. And alliteration is perfect when you're teaching phonics, phonemic awareness, teaching decoding, word analysis. This is perfect for that. Because alliteration is the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. That's why it's our vocabulary word of the hour. We're gonna even make a holiday card. It doesn't matter what holiday your learners celebrate. You can use this with anything. It doesn't have to be a Christmas tree. Whatever they choose, just plain construction paper is fine. But it's going to be a card, and they can write whatever they want, but it has to be in the form of an alliteration. This is why is this important, Nicole? Because it re-emphasizes that which you've already taught them. You've discussed all of the things that they need to know to lead up to this point. Now they're going to take those sounds, they're going to take those words, they're going to take those simple sentences, and now they're going to create in full application something that they can take home to their family. The activity in detail is also within the handbook. The resources for this, the materials needed, can all be purchased at the dollar store. Again, you don't have to use the felt ornament kit. You can use construction paper. You can use glitter. Gotta have some glitter. It's the time. You got glue, stapler. Stapler is gonna be important. Scissors, all things we have on hand. And believe it or not, adults will enjoy this. Crayons, markers, as long as they're able to talk with each other, as long as you remind them who they are and you're constantly emphasizing and affirming them in their process of learning, they will not think it's kiddie. In fact, they will feel empowered. It will be quite the opposite experience. And even you will be able to sit down, delve, and laugh and have a good time while the learner is learning accidentally on purpose, because you are a rock star instructor and you are a rock star administrator, if there are any administrators on this call. That teamwork is important, talking back and forth. You have a learner working on the laptop, but the learner is still participating. That learner could be using that laptop or it could be a desktop to look up new vocabulary to support them in what they're doing to form the card. They could be looking up creative ideas, just having a good time. You may on this particular night have a little soft music playing in the background because you've already dealt with the foundational needs of the learner. You've built the learner to this place. So you're not just throwing a learner out there with an activity. No, you have provided this learner through a process of learning, a gradual release model. So this provides you an opportunity to witness and or make observations about that which you expose the learner to. At the end, this is the smiles you get. Everybody's excited. The learners are ready to go. They're ready to take it home to their family. And that is what that is what we as educators all want to have happen. The same way this young lady was successful in achieving her goal of a high school diploma, and she started at the foundational level of learning. That is what we want for each and every student that we are serving, no matter what their test is. And you may be in a place where you all aren't using TABE, you're using ISET, no matter what you're using, we need to prepare the learners through foundational level gap closing. And we need to do that through a collaborative play environment, building community. Learners buy into community, not skills. If you expose them to the community atmosphere, then you will have little to no trouble exposing them to the necessary skills needed for that learner to be successful in and outside of your classroom. I hope that you were able to really take some of these strategies that we discussed, the breakdowns that were addressed as it related to what phonics was versus what phonemic awareness is, what decoding looks like, what word analysis looks like, making the connection between parts of speech and figurative language. That would be fantastic. I hope that that's what happened here. Now, what's new to Florida IDPAE? We discussed the activity-based learning. We've had some great webinars each week. Last week's webinar was really a driver for what I spoke to today. There was a complete breakdown of what you can expect when dealing with reading for TABE 11 and 12. It gave you a greater level of understanding. so that when you got to this webinar today and we actually begin to unpack the standard and what was being required for that high emphasis 16% that's covered on level E of TABE 11 and 12, you should have been ready. If in fact you hadn't had an opportunity to go back to look at that, go back and look at that webinar and then come back and look at this webinar, and you're going to be amazed at how much they are in sync with one another. So much so that Florida IDPAE has really considered all of the things that you all are saying, because we pride ourselves on really listening to what you all need, what we all need as educators. Moreover, there are reading matrices available, there are math matrices available, there are a plethora of activities. Remember, we mentioned earlier in the presentation about NRS level 1 and level 2. If you go on to IDPAE, there's an area for you to access the matrices down in the bottom right-hand corner of the website at the home page. And for the sake of this webinar, we talked about phonological awareness and phonics and word recognition. Once you really build your learner out, you may want to touch on the key ideas and details, also important and covered in level E, as well as craft and structure, with the anchor standards of 4, 5, and 6. But for this one, we talked about phonological awareness and phonics and word recognition, NRS levels 1 and 2. This is continued, the reading matrices continue. Now, IDPAE has developed an electronic curriculum matrix. What is it? It's an electronic curriculum matrix. It's an online lookup tool that is dynamically returns information and resources that are correlated to adult education framework standards. Very important, because we talked about how important it is for you to make that connection and use that profile report. Ensure that you're using the TABE blueprint standards, and then you can bring the NRS levels through the matrices together and lay it all out on the table. Sit back, put your finger on your chin, and begin to think of creative ways to get your adult learners there. Why is this electronic curriculum matrix needed? It removes the hassle of trying to figure out what aligns with what. Because again, we know adult educators don't always have a lot of time, and more often than not, you have to be able to transition on the fly. There's a how to walk out step by step on how to access this. I'm going to speed through it a bit for the sake of time. But when you get the opportunity, go ahead and select the type of matrix that you're looking for. Select your domain. Select your NRS level that's available to you. Search your results, whatever you're looking for as it relates to standards correlated with a resource activity, because there are going to be quite a bit of resource activities already readily available to you. Here's an example of what the activities look like. This particular activity deals with key ideas and details, a full breakdown of the key details, an example. There's always going to be an answer key for whatever activities you find on IDPAE as it relates to what's new to IDPAE. The additional resources covered within this webinar, you're going to find that some of these resources, you're going to say, well, some of these resources, Nicole, are aligned with K-12. Well, that's important. It's up to you as the instructor to take the foundational skills needed, because there are not a lot of resources for adult learners with foundational level learning. This is why IDPAE creating the resources is so valuable, because these resources that you find on IDPAE are specific to adult learners. The rest of the world may not be as savvy as that as it relates to really addressing the fact that there is some foundational level learning that takes place with adult learners and gaps that need to be closed. So it's a good thing that we have that here for you. Are there any questions?
Nicole, there are a few questions, and yes, the matrices are evolving. So the matrix right now is showing the math. You are correct with that, But stay tuned because we're ready to load some reading resources on there. But just to clarify, you can download each one of the matrices on the IDPAE website on that home page. So all of them, as Nicole described, are located there for you to download them. If you have any problems, just reach out to us. Nicole, you have another comment about the community message that you talked about, and you're getting a lot of feedback on how great that is, and that message really needs to be a message that everyone, you know, knows about.
It certainly does. We have to find a way to make sure that we get that out. Thank you so much for your questions, and I hope that I answered. And just know that what we're going to do is we're going to create something so that that can be supported as well. We understand the importance of that.
That's great, Nicole. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing with IDPAE and Palm Beach County Public Schools. We thank you so much for facilitating this webinar. But before you go, you know we love to hear your feedback. So here are some 3 short questions that I'd like for you to take the opportunity to supply for us. Okay, great. Well, the poll is now closed, so I want to thank you very much for your feedback. I hope that you'll be able to join us on our next webinar. Please take note that it is scheduled for December 4th. The title of this webinar is 4 Critical Factors That Impact Your NRS Data. So we're going to be looking at enrollment, attendance, post-secondary, and performance measures. So I hope that you'll be able to join us on that day. Until then, I really want to thank you for your participation and your support and what you do each and every day to serve our students in adult education. Until then, we'll see you next time.